The Casual Killing Act, Violence Without Consequence, by Rue. There is a moment in every civilization when violence becomes so normalized that people stop recognizing it as violence. And one of the clearest examples in American history was the legal culture surrounding what historians often call casual killing acts during the era of slavery and segregation, where the law itself either protected the killer or refused to prosecute the crime. In the colonial slave codes of the 1700s, particularly in places like Virginia and South Carolina, laws were written that made enslaved Africans property under the law, which meant that if a person killed an enslaved person, the act was often treated not as murder, but as damage to property. One infamous example is the Virginia Slave Code of 1669, which declared that if an enslaved person died during punishment, the person inflicting the punishment could not be charged with a felony because the law assumed no one would intentionally destroy their own property. Think about what that means for a moment. The law was not asking whether a human life had been taken. It was asking whether property had been damaged. And when a society writes laws like that, it creates a terrifying reality: violence without consequence. As slavery expanded through the 1700s and early 1800s, similar legal attitudes appeared across many colonies and later states, where violence against enslaved people was rarely prosecuted, and testimony from black people was often not allowed in court against white defendants. Now stop and really think about the social psychology of that environment. Imagine living in a society where a group of people knows that harming another human being will almost never lead to punishment. When consequences disappear, restraint often disappears with them. If we see violence today, even when laws exist and police forces exist and courts exist, imagine how much violence could occur when the legal system itself refused to intervene. After the Civil War, the legal structure of slavery ended in 1865, but a new era of racial terror emerged through lynching and mob violence, particularly between 1880 and 1930, when thousands of African Americans were killed in public acts of mob violence across the United States. Many of these killings were widely known, sometimes even photographed. Yet prosecutions were extremely rare because local authorities often refused to indict or convict those responsible. Again, the same principle appears. Violence without consequence becomes normalized violence. When a society signals that certain lives will not be protected equally under the law, it creates what historians sometimes call a culture of impunity. And that is the deeper lesson we must understand when studying these periods of history. The danger is not only the violence itself, but the legal and moral framework that allows people to believe the violence is acceptable or invisible. Laws shape behavior, institutions shape culture, and when justice is uneven, violence can quietly multiply because people begin to assume that some lives simply do not carry the same legal weight as others. That is why studying these historical realities matters today, not to inflame hatred or divide people, but to remind every generation why equal protection under the law is one of the most important safeguards any society can build. Because once a civilization begins deciding which lives deserve protection and which do not, it steps onto a dangerous path where violence can become routine, invisible, and tragically easy to ignore. Ashe.